Welcome to the Irish NFL show. This is our Week 13 preview and game picks show. And after the bumper 16-game slate we gorged through across Thanksgiving, we've 6 teams back on bye this weekend. So the Ravens, the Bills, the Bears, the Raiders, the Vikings and the Giants are all idle this weekend. But we've 13 games remaining to get through, which is plenty of action, obviously. And our first section of previews and picks from the rest of the weekend's NFL action is brought to you by RuPoint.com, demonstrating the value of global PR and comms. And you can see how RuPoint can help your business at RuPoint.com. Well, we start with the early slate of games, which features Colts at Titans. And Colm, we've seen some highs of Will Levis since he took over the starting role at the Titans. And we've seen the Colts masterfully kind of managed through the absence of their own presumptive franchise quarterback, Anthony Richardson. Titans are coming off a win, though, and one that actually cost Frank Reich his job ultimately in Carolina. So can they put it up to the Titans here, or can they put it up to the Colts here?
Well, they can if the reports of the Jonathan Taylor injury prove correct. He appears to have a thumb injury, and it's unknown at this point if he is going to miss time. That, I think, is a key factor. I think the Colts have been really impressive, given we know that there are deficiencies in the roster. It is a first-time head coach. They're playing without their starting QB. They moved on from Shaq Leonard. So they've made some really tough decisions. They're also dealing with Jim Irsay and everything that surrounds Jim Irsay. I thought what was interesting, I mentioned this to Brian earlier, was there was a Colts beat writer on with Zach Kiefer this week, and he talked about, Irsay's comments and having to make a decision about whether to write about it or not. And he ultimately said he would, but he knows that will likely cost him in terms of access. And I think that is fascinating as we talk about, increasingly wealthy owners in the league and the way in which, they cover the team. And as much criticism as I give to Jerry Jones at times, one thing that is frequently said about Jerry is he will go out there to put his message out, but he doesn't shy away and he doesn't penalize reporters or for putting stories, as long as they're accurate, out there about the Cowboys. A little bit of a tangent on that. I think, Jonathan Taylor is the key piece for me. Look, the Titans are playing for Mike Vrabel, but I think that is a roster with more holes than the Colts, I think. If Taylor is playing, I think the Colts can get the win on the road, but without Taylor, I just don't think the Colts have enough. He has been playing really, really well. He took time, obviously, given what happened over the summer, to find his groove, but he has really, really improved and taken them to a new level. And one final thing on the Jonathan Taylor piece, kind of, that I thought was interesting, was when he had his kind of incredible season, he talked about how for all the kind of individual accolades, it was no good because they didn't make the playoffs. He would much prefer to go under 100 yards in a game, but the Colts go on to win it. And I thought that was interesting. Even him putting it out there, and I've said it before, take everything anyone says in sports with a pinch of salt, but the fact that a running back is willing to say that, I think, is telling.
The Colts, Brian, riding a 3-game winning streak, as Colin pointed out. Shane Steichen has done very impressively in his first season there. I think if you'd said to people at the start of the season, well, you'll lose Anthony Richardson and you'll be relying on a backup, a lot of people would have said, yeah, they like Gardner Minshew, but that's just not going to work. And yet it has, and they're thereabouts. They're in the hunt for a wild card spot, so they've everything to play for this weekend. The Titans, on the other hand, they eked out a win against Carolina, and there were probably glimmers of hope that King Henry might be rounded into a bit of form there and they can actually run the ball. But the key for the Titans, you would think, is defensively. Jeffrey Simmons has been a monster this season, and that's really where they earn their corn, and they're going to have to do it again this weekend. And as Colin said, maybe one of the keys to it is if Jonathan Taylor isn't there, that perhaps hobbles the Colts' chances of pulling out the win in Tennessee.
Before we get into it, Colin is selecting the Colts, yeah? Or is he going to Shock?
I'm saying it's all dependent on Jonathan Taylor. We don't know at this point. If Taylor plays, the Colts win. If Taylor doesn't play, it's the Titans.
Right, Connor. Well, I'll give an angle as to why the Colts will win without Taylor, because Zach Moss went for 165 yards on 23 carries the first time round in which they played each other. It was actually one of his most dominant performances of the season as the backup to Taylor. And you touched on it there. You know, they lose Richardson, the backup quarterback. You lose Taylor. Well, you've got your backup running back, and Zach Moss, and he's been really efficient over the course of the season. He had 2 touchdowns in that game as well. And is Derrick Henry recurring to some kind of form? I wouldn't have thought so, judging by the numbers last week. Yeah, you're right. They got over the line. They won 17-10, but he only ran for 76 yards last week. It's to the point we discussed last week, Connor. We saw him firsthand in London. We weren't blown away. It's not this Derrick Henry of old, and people, including Titans fans, will question why they didn't move him on the trade deadline to say, look, season is a lost cause. I'm actually very comfortable with the Colts in this game, despite the Taylor situation. I don't think Taylor will play, but I think they've got more than enough. I think the Colts are going in the right direction. If they win this, it would only solidify where they are, and that's 7th seed position. And looks right now that they are turning a table and turning a form at the right time. So for me, it's a convincing Colts win on the road.
Yeah, I have to say I would agree with that. I don't particularly. Yeah, Jonathan Taylor is a big loss. There's no doubt about it. But I think they've been able to cope without him. Zach Moss is a more than capable replacement that has been very impressive this season. I think it's more about the Titans pulled out a win last weekend, but how much of that was down to the fact that they were playing the Panthers. There's things that I like about Will Levis, but he makes you nervous as well. You're like, oh, hold on there, Hoss. Just maybe throw it 7 yards occasionally and get the easy completion. You don't have to rifle everything. Even those shorter completions, he looks like he's trying to put the ball through his receivers at times rather than throw it to them. But yeah, I just don't think they have enough going on there really to disrupt the Colts' momentum. As I say, they're right in a 3-game winning streak, and they're good value for that. And I don't see that being derailed this weekend, I have to say, in Tennessee. Next game up, Colin. Sorry, Brian.
Let's just throw one in there, and it's probably completely off kilter here. I don't think that stadium is as fearsome as they used to be, because they've changed the facilities, they've changed the pitch. They've gone to there was obviously something about that muddy type of pitch in Tennessee. The pitch was never looked nice to look at. I can imagine it didn't look great to play on. And now they've gone to the surface, which is MetLife Stadium, all these other ones. It just doesn't seem as daunting for teams going in there. Bit of a off-kilter conversation, but anyway, threw it in there.
Oh, we shall see. Anyway, Colin, next game up is Falcons at Jets. The Falcons now officially own the NFC South, dubious honour though that may be. They're 3-0 in the division. They haven't had it all their own way by any means outside the division, but surely you would think they will overcome the Jets, who, if they don't know they're dead, pretty much the rest of the league assumes they are.
Well, maybe Aaron Rodgers doesn't, because the 21-day window is open, and Aaron Rodgers apparently is on course to play this season. I think, to be honest, Connor, if that were to happen, surely we get an article in The Lancet, because that would be a medical miracle. I mean, this would have to be studied for the ages. I mean, there would need to be real, because this could transform medicine as we know it. I think, people would really look into this. I mean, it's truly incredible that he's out there training.
How quickly can they synthesize Aaron Rodgers' blood and get the rest of us a shot of that stuff? Because it's proof positive against COVID and everything else.
That this isn't a bigger talking point, that a player is, an unprecedented return. I mean, we are literally watching a Disney movie. This is the Mighty Ducks before our eyes, and nobody is asking questions in relation to how this is happening. Me thinks strange things afoot. In terms of the Falcons, what do you say about this team, other than I think probably one of your two QBs are likely the starter for the Atlanta Falcons next year. I think it will be either Daniel Jones or Justin Fields who will be taking snaps in 2024. They don't make a great deal of sense. They won last week in spite of Desmond Ridder, but they do have very, very special players. If they can get those players the ball, and they got it to Bijan. We saw some of the receivers actually get the ball as well last week. On the turf, it should be I still think they'll get a win there. But also, Brian was talking about the field in Tennessee. This is a field MetLife continues to take souls, and again, this is a field that Aaron Rodgers, with his torn Achilles, 3 and a bit months on, is planning to come back to. We are living through miraculous times.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Indeed, and look, we could devote a
He's
whole
on fire.
to the book of Aaron Rodgers, such as it is. Does the man even have an Achilles? Unlike Achilles, maybe he doesn't have a weakness. But the Falcons, they're not a team that you find yourself picking comfortably. I caught a little snippet of Cam Jordan's Off the Edge podcast earlier, and he was talking about how disappointed he was that the Saints lost to them, saying this is a team we should beat. All we had to do was make their quarterback play quarterback, and the fact that they couldn't, and that they found themselves in a hole and allowed them to dink and dunk, he felt was the key to that game. And the Jets will make life very difficult for Desmond Ridder. So I don't think Falcons will be running away with this one. Everything that's coming out of New York at the moment tells me that this is a team at war with itself, and there's a lot of elements of that on display. And the Rodgers cloud looms large over this. On Pat McAfee, he was essentially saying, look, what it really depends on is whether there's anything to play for. I don't think there will be anything to play for. I think this is all the usual smoke and daggers and making the story all about him that comes with Aaron. But the legacy is you've Nathaniel Hackett still there. In a world in which Ken Dorsey and Matt Canada and others have lost their jobs, Nathaniel remains in situ with probably the worst offense in the league at his disposal here. And that's not all down to Zach Wilson either, let's be fair. And you've got Tim Boyle at quarterback because he's Aaron Rodgers' mate. And you've got Alan Lazard in the receiver core because he's Aaron Rodgers' mate. And that's not going away until next season when they roll the dice again with the then 40-year-old quarterback who's just recovering from the Achilles heel injury, if that's even what it was. And who knows in these crazy times. I'm picking Falcons here.
Well, I'm going to give even more glimmer of light to this Aaron Rodgers saga because I'm going to go with the Jets in this game to turn the Falcons over because there's no consistency to this Falcons team. They're in a false position, I would say, in terms of winning that division because the division is poor. And Bijan had a strong game last week, but we've seen Bijan have a strong game, and then he kind of reverts the following week where he's either sniffed out or he's not being given the ball enough, and the play calling is inconsistent. And Timmy Boyle's numbers were not great last weekend, where 179 yards, 27-38. But it's overshadowed by that unfortunate Hail Mary before halftime. I thought he could have got a little bit better as the game went on. They moved it slightly. So I think the Jets defense navigates a way to keep them in this game, and somehow the Jets find a way to get over the line. It won't be pretty. And then it will just even grow and intensify the conversation around. Still, the Jets fans will believe they're in a wild card chase, and therefore they believe they'll see Aaron Rodgers play. Someone else will put them out of misery. Maybe next week or the week after, but for this week, I think it won't be the Falcons. I think the Jets sneak.
Colin, the Broncos are in Texas this weekend, which sadly means we won't see any sheep play at halftime. That was one of the highlights of last weekend's action, a very special moment, as we discussed on the show on Monday. But the Broncos are riding a 5-game winning streak, a league-high 5-game winning streak. Texas, not an easy place to go. Houston, not an easy place to go right now with the Texans playing the way they are. They're coming off a tough loss themselves, though.
Yeah, and I suppose the end of the game last week, the decision to go for the field goal, the long field goal with a kicker who, this is not Jake Elliott, who is 4 for 4 on field goals over 58 yards, was interesting because, you have a player who is rightly, I think, in the MVP conversation his rookie season, which is ridiculous, and you decided to ultimately take it out of his hands. But they are playing really well.
A lot of talk about that decision, Colin. Why do you think D'Amico Ryans decides to go that way? Is it not to put too much pressure on Stroud? I find that hard to believe given what he's already done in clutch situations.
I was very surprised, but I was surprised by it because Brian and I actually discussed this earlier in the week. Like, I watched this happen with Nathaniel Hackett last year when they invested all the money in Russ, and in the first game of the season, he takes it out of his hands. I think, and with Seth Walder, actually, kind of this is a discussion that will come up on Saturday's podcast for people who want to listen, around aggression in the NFL. And I think we are still in an era where coaches are learning that they need to be more aggressive. I reckon, Connor, in 10 years' time, people will look back at this and go, oh my goodness, why weren't teams going for it more frequently on fourth down? And why, were they taken out of their QB's hands? I think the opportunity probably to, get it done, and like what was there. And he probably thought the percentage chances, but given the kicker, I just think you had more chance on CJ Stroud. Maybe he'll learn from it, and it won't happen again. He is a rookie head coach after all, and I suppose it was a divisional game that may have factored into it as well. This, I think, should be fascinating, because I think you've got I think D'Amico, despite that mistake last week, is a very, very good head coach. He's going up against Sean Payton, who's kind of molded the team into what he wants it to be. The Broncos have been vastly improved ever since they moved on from the vets. They found a way to move the ball, to get into the red zone, and then allow Russ to be Russ. And I suppose the kind of three-headed monster, where whereby they have Williams and Pirine and Jaleel is working. So a very big test for a Broncos side who have beaten some good teams, have had the good fortune, have had the turnover go their way. Can that continue? On the road will be tough, but I think the Broncos are capable of doing it. I'm really interested to see Stroud against this defense. But I like, as you I think highlighted, Connor, on Monday's show, the comment that Trevor Lawrence made, where he'd prefer to be going up against poor quarterbacks. Yeah, I wish the Broncos were playing the Panthers rather than the Texans this weekend. But I'm going to say the Broncos have enough to get this done.
Brian, this is far from a get-right game for the Texans, but they're playing at home and they'll be keen to bounce back, having lost to the Jags. The Broncos, on the other hand, as Colin was alluding to there, it now looks like there's a plan. It looks like they're playing according to Peyton's plan. Russ is cooking, but he's now cooking fast food. He's getting the ball out quicker. He's doing what he's supposed to do. He looks like he's actually having fun in this offense, which is a remarkable turnaround from where they were.
And it looks like the players are having fun with him as well, because it's night and day compared to last year, where it looked like he'd fallen out with quite a lot of people. They seem to have been rallying around him this season, and in particular the last few games. Obviously, there seems to be a different kind of dynamic in terms of the relationship, which is great to see. And he had 11 carries last week, so like they're finding ways to get him in the run, the run pass option. There was a number of ones last week where he went for quite a number of yards. So this is another string to the bow. Now they've navigated an offense that allows him to get back involved. And to use Colum's pun last week around the Steelers, this is the one where you stick the ball up the jumper and you run the ball. And I think he's talking about a three-headed monster with Williams, Pirine, and now Russell Wilson shown in there. The defense had 16 turnovers in 5 games. That to me is significant. You're going into a game where Stroud has turned the ball over 3 times. You're asking the question of why they decided not to take the ball out of his hands when he was sacked on that third down play. Which led to have been a kind of a long fourth down play. So I'd imagine they said, okay, we don't want to put ourselves in a position where he was sacked. He was sacked 3 times in the game where he took three-step drop back. The ball's supposed to be gone, and the ball wasn't gone, and he was sacked. So I don't know whether there was a little bit of concern around how he played in the game in terms of understanding the expectation, and maybe that's why they felt the kick was a better option. We saw frailties last week in terms of turnovers. I think if any defense can get to it right now, it's the Broncos. So I'm going with the Broncos. I think this is right up the Broncos street in terms of methodical offensive play, work the clock, let your defense take care of business. Broncos to win, get out on the road, win, and really put themselves in a really strong position within in the AFC Wild Card race.
Part of me feels the way this season has been going, that once a team hits a 5-game winning streak, that seems to be the time when that team comes off the heater and inevitably drops the last game just as we start talking them up. And I'm tempted nearly to pick the Texans just purely on that basis. But I think there's too many things just working well enough for Denver. And, funnily enough, when we've all gone Denver have tended to win over the last few weeks. So maybe there's something to that as well. I'd like to disagree. But I don't think that this is going to go against the expected path. I think the Broncos will take it. I'm relatively confident in that, given everything we've seen from them over the past couple of weeks. It's hard to think of another team that's trending upwards as strongly as they are on all fronts. I've been very impressive with everything that's happened really since that Miami game. Like that's a big setback to come back from. And it's clear that, as you say, the players are on offense are playing for Russ. They're adherent to Peyton's plan, and the turnovers are evidence of that. And those things come in streaks, and you can regress to the mean, and I'm sure eventually they will. But I think that this meeting happens at just the right time for them. I think it would have been maybe a different story if it had happened a couple of weeks ago. But given where both teams are, I think that Denver takes this one on the road. Next game up, column, is Lions at Saints. I might start off with this one myself, actually, because I've been sitting in the pocket waiting for you two guys to pick first. So it's only fair that I throw my own tuppence in here, and we'll see what way it goes. Lions have been wobbling over the last 2 weeks. Like, yes, obviously, thanks to the collapse by Chicago, they pulled out the divisional game there. Got downed by the Packers. An awful lot of things went wrong in that game, and people now have their doubts over Detroit, probably for the first time this season. Other than that humbling they got at the hands of the Ravens, which was probably easier to explain away than what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, given how hot Baltimore was at the time and given the weapons that they have at their disposal. Saints obviously will want to bounce back after losing to their hated rival Falcons last week and not happy with their performance. But I think ultimately what's happened in Detroit is more fixable than what we've been seeing in New Orleans all season long. I think the Lions will win this one on the road. Interesting one for Dan Campbell, obviously, as the former Saints tight ends coach. He has a bit of experience there, and they have a bit of experience of him. And this is a game he'll desperately want to win, and I think it's a game that he'll rally his troops to win in. Colm, what say you?
I think the Lions have some defensive problems, and I think that I don't know if the Saints are able to take advantage of it because of the inconsistencies in Derek Carr's play. Like, Carr was moving the ball really well until they got into the red zone. Like, it's like he's become the antithesis of Russell Wilson. He's slinging the ball until he gets into the red zone, and then all of a sudden he's throwing picks. Olave was absolutely magic when he was on the field last week. He went off with an unfortunate injury. But I just think it's so inconsistent. And when you brought him in and you gave him that money, like, the idea was he was going to be a much more stable quarterback than Jameis. But would they be better off just having Jameis out there and not having tied themselves to the Derek Carr contract, because they're kind of lumbered with this now for a number of years? And this is an aging team. This is a team who kept pushing and pushing contracts back to maximize the end of Drew Brees' career. And I just think with the way, like, it's not like a quarterback can turn an entire kind of season around, Connor, on a dime, right? And so my fear is that Derek Carr doesn't have enough to do it for the Saints. But I do worry about the Lions when they go up against like offensive lines that are able to deal. If you can take Hutchinson out of the game, it's a real problem for the Lions, but I think they'll have enough in this one to get it done.
Brian, we know your love for Derek Carr is a love that knows no bounds, but right now there's a lot of Saints fans who probably be wishing they still had Andy Dalton. Yeah,
I know. It's certainly not a fast card in which they've purchased over the off season. It's the frailties are there. And funny enough, he had over 300 yards in terms of in the game last weekend, but unfortunately, ultimately it comes down to you got to score touchdowns, and we touched on it on Monday's show. They're 0-5 in the red zone, 5 out of 6 field goals. It's not going to win you the game, and yet they only lose 24-15.
And a desperate pick six that Jesse Bates took.
Yeah, of course, yeah, and that was actually a key moment in the game, because it looked like they'd started faster, they got out quickly, and then that just kind of turned the game. I'm more where my concern in this game is around the other quarterback, and that's Jared Goff, because we saw him turn the ball over a number of times against the Bears a fortnight ago on the Sunday game, and they got over the line in that game, and we discussed the nature of how the Bears had an opportunity to close out that game, and it didn't come to pass, and they allowed a Lions team to come back into it. But for 3.5 quarters, 4 quarters, 3.5 late on in the fourth, Goff his numbers weren't great, and he had a poor game, and he was turned over, and we saw the same inconsistency last week, in particular the first half against the Packers, and they did show him up last weekend. I mean, there was interceptions, there was the turnover and the fumble, there was a fumble that was returned for a touchdown. He didn't have the greatest of games, so that's 2 games in a row now where Goff has kind of gone back to what we saw at all, which is he's great 1 minute, he flatters to deceive, and that for me is a concern going into this game. They got to get back, for me, which is effective run game. We saw a couple of weeks ago in LA, and when they ran it down the throats on the Chargers, they only had 125 yards combined between Montgomery and Gibbs last week. But I think in this one, this might be a game, a get-right game for Derek Carr, in the sense of they'll put up a lot more points. But I think ultimately it'll be similar to what we saw in LA, where the Lions come out the right side of it, high scoring affair. Lions just get it done.
All right, that's the end of our first segment of game previews and picks, brought to you by RootPoint, demonstrating the value of global PR and comms. You can see what RootPoint can do for your business at rootpoint.com. So we move into our second segment of game picks, and before we get into the later evening games on Sunday, Brian, there is of course a Thursday night football game where the Cowboys host the Seahawks in Arlington. Cowboys favourites there.
Yeah, a huge game, and it is a huge game, bearing in mind the NFC Wild Card race with Seattle heavily involved and the Cowboys heavily involved. We have a podcast coming out tomorrow morning. Myself and Andrew Morgan have previewed this game, and of course our partners at QuinnBet have interesting odds on the game. It's very one side in terms of the Cowboys are 2-9 to win the game. They're -8 on the handicap. But look, there's various different betting options for the game with QuinnBet, QuinnBet.com, and also they have some specials and promotions on the game where you'll find at QuinnBet.com/promotions. But an interesting, probably one of the better Thursday night games which we've had. So check out the podcast tomorrow morning for Cowboys fans, the likes of Fred, who are keen to hear what we have to say about this particular game. A lot of one-sided conversations around how dominant the Cowboys are likely to be in this game, bearing in mind how Seattle have played over the course of the last few weeks.
Fred saying in the comments there, Brian, that he fancies Dallas by 14 to 17 points, so he has them comfortably covering the spread. Anyway, we'll see what yourself and Andrew Morgan did conclude when that podcast drops tomorrow. Column Chargers at Patriots is the next one up for us. Is there any incentive for New England to win here, first of all?
Well, I mean, I don't know, other than Bill Belichick, I suppose, wanting to right the wrong. I mean, like, it's incredible, right? When you look at Bill Belichick's career, okay, before Bill Belichick even became a head coach, his game plan was in the Hall of Fame from his time with the Giants. I mean, this truly is a defensive genius. And because, I suppose, of the Brady stuff, we sometimes, and we forget just how good. Like, this is the guy who shut down the Rams offense when the Rams were scoring all around them. Like, he has shut down so many great offenses. He had, Sam Darnold seeing ghosts. He put young QBs in a blender. And Tommy DeVito,
he kept Patrick Mahomes off the field for just long enough to mastermind what for me was his signature victory in the AFC Championship game. That should have been the Chiefs' Super Bowl all the way there, the way they were going. That was an incredible piece of scheme.
Like, there's so many you can kind of point to over the years, and then the Giants and Tommy DeVito do a number on him. I mean, that is like, it's like what's got, like, talked about it the other night. It really feels like the end of Wenger's time in Arsenal, where other coaches were kind of patting him on the head and saying, "Oh, remember the good times, Arsene," and that's what it feels like with Bill Belichick. All the talk about is where he's going to be next year. And I saw Cam Newton saying today, and a couple of others, that they expect the Panthers to make a play. I think, can you imagine David Tepper and Bill Belichick in the same room? I think that would be fascinating. If that were to happen, I hope that we can get a fly on the wall documentary out of that, because that could win any number of awards, I think. I don't see how you can I suppose, manage a QB situation, right? Because Mac Jones in his first year, you can say Mac Jones didn't have the ceiling of other QBs, right? That was too low, and that ultimately he wasn't going to go on to be a great QB. But he was serviceable. He was fine. Like he was a solid starter, right? He wasn't explosive. He wasn't fantastic, but he was a solid starter. And he's completely fallen off a cliff. Like he has been benched 4 times in 11 starts. Like it's over 1/3 of the games where he's been benched. And for a guy who they cut at the start of the season, Bailey Zappi wasn't even on the roster. So something is very wrong there. It's time, I think, for them to move on, which is crazy that we're saying. I never thought we'd be saying that at this point in the season, but I do think that is the case. And on the other side, I think we all know that the likelihood is that Brandon Staley is not long for the Chargers job. And do the Chargers need to go and change the GM as well? Because the way in which the roster is constructed and the way in which the cap hits come next year is a disaster for them. But I think they should have enough in this game. And I think Justin Herbert is good enough and playing well enough to carry the Chargers to victory.
Yeah, if ever there was a pick I wanted back, it was picking the Patriots to beat the Giants last week. I sort of had this notion, as I was saying this time last week, that no, if there's one game that Belichick desperately wants to win and will have the ultimate plan to win, and he'll put Tommy DeVito in a blender, it's the Giants game. And of course, that wasn't even near happening in the end, although it did come down to that missed relative chip shot field goal that could have at least sent the game to overtime and given us more joyous scenes in MetLife Stadium. A bit of a mercy killing there ultimately. You're not loving picking the Chargers either going into New England, given the way they've been going at the moment. They're on a 3-game skid themselves, Brian. Ultimately, I do see Brandon Staley keeping himself alive for one more week. But right now, the Chargers have a 9% chance to win the playoffs. So even a win here doesn't do a huge amount in terms of the inevitable, it seems, change happening at the end of their season.
Yeah, it'd be very much what could have been for the Chargers this season. I mean, you look at their schedule and look at the games in which they played. They've lost out in a number of close games. Just the Dolphins game, week 1. The Lions game, even last week, in fairness, they played quite well for large parts of the game last week. The Ravens didn't play at the level in which we saw recently, but still they found a way to get over the line. It was quite close in the second half, and the Ravens gave the Chargers many an opportunity to get really into it and get it over the line. They couldn't do it. They've lost 4 games, with less than a touchdown this year. It's just been, again, another wasted season, unfortunately, because with the quarterback and the talents they have. We touched on Belichick there, and interestingly enough, it was out there a few weeks ago. It's died down a bit. Peter King addressed it when we had him on the show recently, is that don't be surprised if Belichick goes completely off kilter and goes out West Coast and he's the next Chargers head coach. And, the lure of having a quarterback such as Justin Herbert to work with, bearing in mind what he's had at his disposal over the last few years, might be too much for him to turn down. So maybe that's the storyline leading into this game. It's Belichick, as opposed to last week with his love and relationship for the Giants. This could be the future team for him in terms of coaching. I think the Chargers will have enough. They've got players there that can, you got Eckler there, you got Keenan Allen. Everett, the tight end, came back and had a strong game last week off injury. Patriots are in such a difficult spot right now, quarterback situation. Colin's right when he called out last week, said the other night, look, it's not ideal, but you just run with the same quarterback. You can't keep going shopping and chain. That's not good for anybody. It's not good for the team, not good for the players. No offensive structure. It's the Chargers for me. I think this is actually a comfortable one on Sunday. I think it's one of the few games this season the Chargers fans will be relieved in the fourth quarter. It's not coming down to the last drive.
All right, Cardinals Steelers up next. I'll go first here. Is there any way that the Steelers don't go 8-4? I mean, I'm trying to convince myself that that this has to come to an end at some point. We did see, to be fair, the offensive explosion as the Eddie Faulkner era got underway as offensive coordinator. I should say it's the Eddie Faulkner and Mike Sullivan show technically, because they're joint offensive coordinators. Eddie Faulkner calling the plays. They did put up over 400 yards of offense for the first time in 58 games. That only translated into 16 points though. And again, you're flip-flopping with the Steelers on, do they get found out eventually this season, or do they figure it out? every time you see signs that they may be figuring it out, something else crops into view that makes you think, offensively, I still find it very, very difficult to get behind this and to see them as anything other than a team that's flattering to deceive. The Deontay Johnson stuff that we talked about the other night, kind of one sign there of that all is not well in that locker room on the offensive side. So we'll see if Eddie Faulkner, Mike Sullivan and Mike Tomlin have an answer for all of that. Ultimately, though, I still think they probably have enough to beat Arizona this weekend. I'm going Pittsburgh in this one. Colin, what about you?
Oh, you got to feel a little bit for the Cardinals in their run-in. I mean, they faced the Steelers, the Niners, the Eagles, and the Seahawks in their last run. They also had the Bears in there, but like of those teams that I mentioned, like they're so physical, all of them, and they kind of play punch you in the mouth football. Look, it was hilarious, I suppose, as the Steelers, get to the 400, as you pointed out, Connor. But many of the same issues still existed. But I think, especially on the defense, they are good enough to. I think, will they get found out? Like, it's going to be very interesting in the playoffs. I think when the Steelers meet really, really top tier teams, that's where potentially it could change. But if they are able,
like the Ravens and Bengals teams, they've already beaten.
Well,
they find ways to get it done.
They do, by dragging you down into the mud. They force you. They try to get you to play their game. And if you allow them to do that, and the divisional rivals do, then you're in trouble. And what you need to do is to look to dictate the game on your terms, and then all of a sudden it becomes a very sort of different thing. The piece, I suppose, for the Cardinals, I just don't think that they have the roster to compete. I think, again, we've talked about this a little bit already, but the more time goes on, the more we see that Kyler is going to be the starting QB there, I believe, in 2024 anyway. And I think it's about putting the pieces around him. So they continue to be better than we thought, but a bit like the Rams last week. Ultimately, I think the Steelers will have too much, but I don't expect them to score 37 points a la the Rams.
Brian, Kyler Murray is a chaos engine, and he's difficult to plan for, even for a defense as vaunted as that Steelers unit led by TJ Watt. Do you see any way that Arizona get the upset win here?
No, I think it's going to be quite a one-sided affair. I think you're talking about the Steelers, 8-4. Well, they've got the Patriots on Thursday Night Football next week, and could be sitting here Friday week, and they're 9-4. But now they do have some really tough games coming up. But again, as like Colin said, if they need to play and trend in the way they are, which essentially to get these teams down to a gritty and dirty game, essentially, in terms of playing their style of football, who knows? But look, the Cardinals, for me, had a bit of the Cardinals, not necessarily to turn their season around. I thought they felt they needed to win that game in Houston 2 weeks ago. They played well for large parts. They turned over CJ Stroud a number of times, and they had the opportunity twice in the last few minutes to get down and essentially win the game. They couldn't get it done. And last week, they kind of fell back into what we saw earlier on the season, which is teams will go in, live with them early, then essentially take over and bully them. But we saw from the get-go last week that the Rams were there to take care of business. And I think, bearing in mind where the Steelers are right now in these two games, this is a huge opportunity for them, and it's a huge opportunity to put out a bit of a performance, because even the games in which they're winning, like last week, 16-10 against a backup quarterback, albeit it's a divisional game, it's not compelling. I think in the next 2 weeks, they've got an opportunity to really stamp their authority on a wild card position, bearing in mind who they play, and I think on Sunday they will win this game, and it'll be a very dominant defensive performance.
The Commanders host the Dolphins this weekend, Colin, and the Commanders have a habit of sticking around in games. The Dolphins have a habit of beating the teams that they should beat. Is there any way that this one goes against the pattern to you?
I suppose I don't think in this one. I mean, I think the Dolphins' injuries are a huge concern. To lose who they have on defense in particular in that game on Black Friday. Again, due to the turf is a huge issue perhaps in the playoffs. But they have been improving as the year has gone on, and I think that they have probably shown that, like, if they can the offense hasn't been as explosive, but I think the defense has taken a step up. The Commanders, I mean, Jack Del Rio, and who isn't a man I have any love for, given his history both with the Broncos and also with our hated rivals. But like you traded away your two best edge rushers, and then like you're surprised that defensively you've kind of fallen off in the latter half of the season. Ron talked about it. Ron is coaching for his career. Sam Howell is playing. They have some nice pieces, but I think the Dolphins, they know that they have to keep winning. I think they have enough talent to continue to do so. What will be interesting, I suppose, is to see how, particularly the interior, because I think the defensive line, the interior of the defensive line of the Commanders has been good. So to see how the Dolphins O-line continues to hold up against that.
An upward turn, I would say, in the Commanders' defense, really, on the back of Del Rio being forward, for me, is the only way they can go in this game. We saw Tua have a bit of a strange ending to the half last week with essentially 2 interceptions in less than a minute with the pick 6, and then he threw kind of a very, very kind of complacent type of pass, which was intercepted, and maybe if in that scenario where he reversed back to that type of team. But I think they still win 34-13, and they were convincing last week in the end. And there's too many things up in the air for the Commanders. Are we essentially looking at Rivera going to the end of the season, which for me looks not a likelihood. I think if the new owners, Harris had his way, he'd be firing everybody. But I think obviously he needs to hold fire for the time being. They've got rid of a number of defensive people. It wasn't just Del Rio. There was a few other ones that went last week. So unless we see something similar to offensive teams this year where they've got rid of the offensive coordinator and there's a reaction, can't say. I think there's too many explosive players on the Dolphins. I think this is a real big spot for the Dolphins right now. They're 3 games ahead in the division. Essentially, the division is now wrapped up. Their focus now has to be trying to get that 1 seed and get the games in Miami come January, because I think that really makes a big difference to whether they can be in the championship game or not. Going on the road is always a very difficult thing, especially when they've been beating a team with the nature of the teams that they're going to be up against come playoff time.
Yeah, and the number 1 seed, and it probably bears no repeating, or does bear repeating, even though we've said it many times, is such a prize to play for, particularly in the AFC, and probably, to your point, Brian, for the Dolphins more so than any other teams. Given the historic unraveling of Dolphin seasons when the weather starts getting cold and when they have to go on the road to places like Pittsburgh or Baltimore or other places you might end up going up, Kansas City in the playoffs. I like the way the Dolphins have evolved this season compared to last season. I like the way they've been evolving during the season. And, to your point, Colm, they're not recording as many explosive plays. I don't think they're relying on it to the same degree. I also think, some teams have figured out how to take that away. We've seen a couple of teams do a pretty decent job on Tyreek Hill, which is relative terms when you're talking about a guy who's already, I think, at 1,700 yards for the season. That threat is very clear. Mike McDaniel's real specialty is the run game. He was run game coordinator in San Francisco, learned from the best and distinguished himself in that regard. And we see that with Raheem Mostert. We still got Devon Achane to come back as well. Still by yards per carry, the best running back in the NFL after a relatively handful of games that he's played since coming into the team as a rookie. He's a nice one to get back down the stretch. If we're talking about the injuries there, Teron Armstead is a big loss, though. That's a problem, and that's something that you'd be very concerned about from a Tua Tagovailoa perspective, especially going into these December games. But that being said, if you're going to the Commanders, who are now, to your point, Colin, down Montez Sweat and Chase Young, not able to get pressure up front and relying on an unreliable secondary and linebacker core behind that, this is very much a game that the Dolphins should win, and I think they will win it. Brian, you have one more point to make before we start turning to the 9 o'clock games.
I think that's actually
just popped up. It was that Keenan Allen has missed practice due to a quad injury, which is a significant issue because I think he hauled in 14 targets the other night. He's it, and that's what I was saying, Connor, in terms of the roster construction. Tom Telesco obviously values size over speed, but the first round pick hasn't lived up to it. Mike Williams is injured, and the pieces, like, they have Nick Vannett at tight end. He's currently in the concussion protocol. Like, they failed to add pieces. They went all in some ways this season in terms of pushing contracts, right? And you look at, and I think Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack, in terms of the cap hits next year, are 8th and 9th. That's not 8th and 9th in defensive players. That's 8th and 9th in the entirety of the league in terms of their cap hits in 2024. So they went all in this year, but they didn't get the pieces that you really need. Like, you have to have a tight end who can block. Otherwise, teams are going to take advantage of that. And if you lose Keenan Allen, like, who is Herbert going to throw the ball to here? Because it's not the tight end. Like, Everett isn't going to be your main guy. So that's a significant injury if he can't go on Sunday.
Yeah. They'll run the ball very, very slowly with Austin Eckler, who looks like he's playing with his cleats full of cement. The way he's going looks like he's running in slow motion these days, and sadly not the same player he was before. Brian, Panthers at Bucks, and the last time David Tepper fired a head coach, which was Matt Rule only last season, and they got a bit of a bounce off the back of it, and they did finish the season strongly, which was just enough to push them down the draft order and force them into a trade with Chicago to get the number 1 overall pick for Bryce Young. Do they get a bounce, and can they take that to Tampa Bay?
It's mad because it was only last December in which they were leading by 10 points going into the fourth quarter in Tampa Bay, with Wilkes as interim head coach, and they had won that game essentially, but they won the division. It's like, careful what you wish for. You fire a head coach, you stumble on a defensive coordinator who becomes your interim head coach. Does a fantastic job, but he's not flashy enough to be the head coach in the long term. And here he's doing a fantastic job in San Fran. I wonder, does he have buyer's remorse there and think back, God, if only I had just done what the right thing was to do, which essentially was to give Wilkes the job. I don't see it myself. I think the Bucks, and I don't think it's a fantastic game in terms of the Bucks are going to dominate the whole game. And the Bucks have their own flaws. They're 4-7 for a reason. They're still hanging around in the playoff, like a lot of teams, who are down in the pecking order in the NFC, including their two teams. Colin, we're only 2 games out of the playoffs. Let's not forget that, But I think Evans and Mayfield have been playing well as a connection together, that they will do enough offensively. And one of the bright spots this year has been the running back that came out of Arizona last year, White. He's been really good for the Bucks. I think the Bucks will do enough on Sunday to win this game. I don't see this one being close. I think, unfortunately, for the Panthers, I listened to a podcast today. You're talking about wanting something to play for in December, good or bad, in terms of losing games and finding yourself in a position draft-wise. Where are the Panthers? I mean, essentially, it's a complete mess. There's no first-round pick. It's going to be really difficult to attract players in the off-season unless they get a head coach of real significance. It's a messy one. Bucks win another messy one on Sunday. All day. Bucks all day.
I introed it facetiously, wondering will we get the dead cat bounce? But I mean, the firing of Frank Reich, you don't imagine that this is like shipping Josh McDaniels out the door where there's a relief rally and people are delighted to see the back of him. Frank Reich isn't that kind of guy. I imagine the players are probably reacting similarly to the way we reacted and kind of rolling their eyes at another impulsive decision by their owner. I was interested again. Another pearl from the mouth of Cam Jordan on his podcast earlier this week was talking about how he actually and the Saints had a lot of time for Bryce Young. Thought they liked a lot of what they saw when they played him, and didn't understand some of the criticism that's come in his direction. But I think looking at the Bucks, to your point, Brian, that's where I'd be focused for this one. They've come off the back of a couple of tough losses, but they were against San Francisco and Indianapolis, 2 teams that have plenty about them. The close loss to the Texans in game they probably should have won. I've liked what I've seen so far of Baker, and the Baker honeymoon has lasted a lot longer than most of us, myself included, expected. He's been playing well. He does have that good connection with Evans. There's too much talent on this Bucs team to get downed here, even still, superannuated as they are. It's Tampa Bay for me. Colin.
Yeah. To me, Connor, I suppose the big piece here is the Panthers' future, because it's like David Tepper is King Midas he's the antithesis of King Midas. Like Midas, everything he turned to gold. Not the case with David Tepper, a man who is notoriously petty. There was a piece in the Ringer this week that came out, and people it may or may not have seen it, but he wasn't promoted at Goldman Sachs. So later on, when he made his money, he went and he bought that executive's house, the mansion, and he bulldozed it to the ground just to make a point that he had been passed over in terms of promotion. This is a guy who has gotten involved, and it's not just the Bryce Young pick. Obviously, that's the focus, and I thought the press conference was an abject disaster in terms of just about every aspect of it. It made no sense what he was saying, and I don't think it helped his young QB at all. He keeps trying to say, like, he basically spent 40 minutes trashing him, and then he says at the end, "Oh, we all believe in Bryce." Funny way of showing it. The other piece, Connor, is like the other picks there haven't worked. Like, they spent quite a high pick on Matt Corral. Like, yeah, he's not on a team currently. Ike Ekwonu hasn't worked out at all. You pointed to stats when we were talking earlier in the week in relation to their wide receiver one, who they gave to the Bears, who has been a revelation. And like, how are they going about team building? Like, it seems like he thought that the only thing you needed was a QB. There are so many issues in Carolina, I feel, and it's not like the situation where D'Amico walked into with the Texans, right? Where basically the Texans horribly used guys as cannon fodder. They used a couple of head coaches as cannon fodder to get right. Now, because coaches' contracts are guaranteed, at least those guys got paid. But maybe that's what the Panthers need to do. But because they have Bryce Young and because they've invested, and David Tepper doesn't have any patience, he's not going to do that. But this is not fixable, I believe, in one off season, unless he's going to really go all out, because we know there are ways and means of bending the cap if you have an owner who's prepared to put their hands in their pockets. But I do think and David Tepper's behavior should get fans to really look at ownership and what happens when you get a meddling owner who won't leave well enough alone. I don't think things are right. I think, even the fact that they cleared out, as soon as special teams guy comes in, he clears house essentially as much as possible. Bryce Young's size is a real problem. He is not seeing the middle of the field. He's not passing to the middle of the field. They don't have, Adam Thielen. What was it? A quote I heard in a podcast: Adam Thielen is option 1, 2, and 3. And Adam Thielen was a very good receiver in Minnesota. He's still talented, but he's not wide receiver 1. The Bucs are still there, as you and Brian have commented. They should win this game.
All right, that's where we end our second segment of picks. We move into our third segment of picks now, and what a game we have to start off with here, Brian. It's Niners at Eagles. We really hope, as you were saying the other day, that this turns out to be the NFC Championship game that we didn't get last season, obviously because of the injury to Brock Purdy, which ruined that one as a contest. Niners on a roll. Eagles, they're 10-1. They have the best record in the league. They're finding literally every which way but lose. They find a way to pull games out. 2 games recently in which they've been outgained by both the Chiefs and the Bills, and yet they put W's on the board. This is what they do all day long. It's a fascinating clash. Strength on strength on strength on strength, pretty much wherever you look. Who has the power to come out on top in this arm wrestle?
This is one of the most difficult games of the weekend to pick from, and rightly so. I mean, it is two standout teams in the NFC. We touched on it so many times, but the AFC has 6 or 7 teams, and an abundance of teams that could represent the AFC in the Super Bowl. Realistically, I don't think anyone would argue it's these two who, in all likelihood, will be one of them will be representing the NFC come February in Vegas. It's one of those, and for all the concern around this Eagles team, we touched on, they're 10-1. They're not playing at the level which we saw last year. They're not even favourites going into this game. I was reflecting on the odds on this game, looking at Quinn Bet earlier this evening. Like they're 2-point underdogs. Like essentially, the expectation is the 49ers are going to go in there and win on Sunday by 3 points minimum. And I can't get away from the Eagles.
That's on Nick Sirianni's whiteboard right away. Like he's going to be making an absolute meal out of that in the locker room, no doubt about it.
And he did it last year.
They don't respect us.
How many times last year did he put things up on the whiteboards around certain comments, certain people, not necessarily even the people in which they were playing against, but it always motivated the team. I thought there was some chinks in the armor last week. The offensive line struggled at times last week against the Bills defense, but when it came down to the Bills defense, couldn't do enough to stop them. The 49ers obviously will think they can stop them. I think we've touched on it recently around deficits going into 4 quarters or deficits in the second half and how teams react to it, how teams don't panic. And Kyle Shanahan is yet to kind of get that team over the line where they've struggled in games, there's a deficit there and they get back and win the game and kind of prove a point, where the Eagles, time and time again, are never gone. They're never dead. It's a column always refers to certain things around the Fergie era where, you know, it just never gave in. And that's the mantle of which this team, the Eagles, are dealing with right now. They just don't know they don't know when they're lost. And even, like, if it wasn't for some strange and unusual plays in that Jets game, in which we were traveling back from London that evening, Connor, they could have been easily been unbeaten going into this game. It's Eagles for me, and Sunday I think they should be favourites. They're at home, and I think the only thing now that could stop them going to the Super Bowl is themselves, if they, you know, take the foot off the gas. Because the difficulty we find with NFC teams is that when your one seed is locked up so early, how do you navigate the rest of the season? Do you let players play? Do you sit players and you get back in? Last year they found it easy enough to come back and put it right. I'm not sure whether that's always going to be the case. That would concern me. I think you're better off being playing proper football going into the playoffs. I think the way the Eagles are going, they won't have to. Eagles for me.
Colin, Brian has already touched on some of these points. Your case for the Eagles is that they could easily be unbeaten. If you want to make the case the other way, you say Commanders had 2 good opportunities to down them. They lost the game to the Jets. Chiefs probably should have beaten them. The Bills had a really good chance to beat them. And it could be a very different scenario if those results hadn't gone the Eagles' way.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, the Eagles haven't played well, which, you know, again, you can look at it and say they have yet to find top gear, and if they do that, my goodness, watch out. Equally, you can say something isn't right, and I keep going back to it. I think not having Shane Steichen is a little bit of an issue. I do believe that he, you know, has the magic dust and he has a real feel, but they find ways. And again, the piece, Connor, isn't that it isn't just, say, Jalen Hurts, or it isn't just AJ Brown. It is that it's different guys every week. Like, they have all of these players. So if it isn't Hurts, if it isn't AJ Brown, it's the kicker making those kicks. It's Slay coming up with huge plays when needs be. It's the pass rushers getting home. So I think they're serious business. That said, the Niners are going into this with a real chip on their shoulder, and they're going to want to prove what they can do. I think these teams will meet again in the NFC Championship game, and I may pick differently on that occasion. I think I likely will pick differently on that occasion, but I'm going to say the Niners get a modicum of revenge on Sunday, but that Nick Sirianni and the Eagles will use that and will ride that wave for the rest of the season.
Well, I'm going to pick that baton up there because I think that's a really interesting point, and I've been going back and forward in my head, not only on the pick, but also on who's motivated more to win this one and who's going to have more of a chip on their shoulder. As you've eloquently put it, the Niners will feel like we never got to give the account of ourselves, and we would have beaten you if we had Brock Purdy and all of that sustained them and put them on this revenge tour for this season. But the Eagles will be looking at it going, in Sirianni's fashion. You touched on it just the other night, how he's the embodiment of what you'd expect a Philadelphia Eagles coach to be. He's exactly like the fans in that city. He's loud and he's brash and he's chippy. And he's going to be looking at this like nobody respects us. How dare people suggest that the Niners would have beaten us if all their guys had started? Look what we accomplished last season, and we're only getting started. All of that we've talked about, as you said, you can choose your analogy. Are they like the Fergie era United? Are they like the Jim Gavin era Dubs, that they don't have to be playing at their best? Somebody will always step up. Somebody comes up in a big spot when they need them most, even if it's the kicker. All of that said, though, I don't think that there's a team in the conference or potentially even in the league that's better equipped to go into the link and win in a fair fight than the 49ers. And if it remains a fair fight and if everybody stays fit and active and as they should be, and I do take your point on board, Brian, and I think kind of like you, Colin, I might pick differently if this ends up being the championship game because of my question mark as you raised it over Kyle Shanahan, and I'm not sure when it gets right down to it, when it's cojones in the wheelbarrow time, is Kyle the man that makes the right call? We've seen too many examples of that going the other direction. But I actually do think San Francisco are going to win this one. I think it's come at a right time for them in terms of the momentum that they have. I think they arguably need it more than Philly because they really want that number one seed, which is still potentially in grasp. And they know well that the Eagles have to go and play the Cowboys next week too, that they're going through a bit of a gauntlet at the moment. Like, yes, so far they've beaten the Chiefs, they've beaten the Bills, and this, run of really difficult games that they've got couldn't have gotten off to a better start. But you keep going to the well in these one-score games, and eventually you get one that goes against you. And I think that this is one that will go against the Eagles. Look, could they and will they still make the Super Bowl? I think it's still a very, very high possibility. And when it comes down to the playoffs, I might go the other way, but I'm going Niners for this one.
So I was going to throw one more word before we move on, because I know we've constantly treated against it. If they were to lose, and if the result goes the way in which you are forecasting, and then they were to get toppled in Dallas that next week, which is a legitimate possibility, bearing in mind how successful the Cowboys have been at home this season, what will the pick be if the game is played in San Fran as opposed to played in Philly come championship game? Because I might reverse my selection and go with the Niners on that occasion.
That's too many variables. Now we're playing 3D chess. I'm getting lost. Reserve the right to come back to that one. But we move forward with Browns at Rams, Brian. Both still very much in the playoff picture here. There's reasons for Cleveland not to be cheerful with everything that's gone on and with the quarterback injury and so on. And yet they can find ways to win, and they have found ways to win. They have this incredible defense that we've talked about time in and time out. The Rams, we've spoken at length on this show throughout the season about how impressed we've been and how notable it is, how joyous Sean McVay and that locker room seems to be at the moment about the gems that they've unearthed. And they have everybody fit and everybody coming together, almost everybody just at the right time. This is quite an intriguing little encounter, I think.
Yeah, like if the Browns, for me, had Sean Watson quarterback right now, no matter what we think of him and the inconsistency, he's not playing at the level we saw 3 years ago, I'd be convinced the Browns are going to the playoffs. Absolutely, 100%. They were 8-3 going into the game last week. Obviously, a difficult day out in Mile High, and their quarterback, who was selected ahead of PJ Walker, is out with a concussion and looks unlikely he'll play this weekend. So we're reverting back to PJ Walker, and there's a rationale and a reason as to why they didn't go with him in the first place after the Sean Watson injuries. They're not convinced by him. We spoke about him a couple of weeks ago, Connor, after the Seattle game, in which the Browns on the road defensively dominated for 3.5 quarters, and yet they found a way to allow a late touchdown. But a lot of that was down to the inconsistency of PJ Walker in that game, the number of interceptions. And I'm looking at their schedule. I mean, they got the Jags next week. They've got the Texans to come 2 weeks later. The Bears are in there. I see a fall off for the Browns now. I think defensively, defensively they're going to struggle against the Rams offense that's been quite high scoring and outpowering, and Williams coming back is a huge addition to have him back. You saw last weekend 3 touchdowns. It's the Rams for me, and the Rams are right in the mix for the playoffs. And I think at home on Sunday, I think they're going to beat the Browns. I really do. I think this Browns team are going to struggle for the large parts unless this defense can keep them in games and they win 4 quarters. But don't see it with because of the quarterback situation.
Yeah, same as for me. I think it's fairly open and shut. I think it's a Rams win as well, Colin, with one thing that might potentially overturn my judgment, which is for one night only, we may get Joe Flacco back.
We are getting Joe Flacco, from what I understand. Within the last little while, Kevin Stefanski stepped up to the podium and he announced that Joe Flacco is the backup QB. So if Dorian can't go, which is looking unlikely at this point, Joe Flacco will start ahead of PJ Walker. And I have been privy to the Joe Flacco show. And it is not pretty. He caught fire once, and that was a very interesting Super Bowl run for the Ravens. Definitely would recommend Bill Simmons' magnificent piece, which is now a decade old, Daring to Ask the Ped question. To people, really goes into that kind of Super Bowl run that the Ravens had. Joe Flacco ain't it. And it's unfortunate for long-suffering Browns fans that this is the situation they find themselves in. Stefanski says he is hopeful and he thinks that Myles Garrett will play. But when the player himself said that he heard something pop in his shoulder, like that's not good. And I think that's probably speaking to the fact that they need him out there. The reason I think the Rams will run is because I think what you saw like the interesting thing to me last week, and this was JOK, I thought he was brilliant. I thought he was absolutely fantastic against the Broncos, but the Broncos were able to run on the Rams, and they utilized their 2 running backs, be it Javonte or be it P. Ryan, to neutralize Myles Garrett, and they basically ran away from him for the entirety of the game. I think Sean McVay will have looked at that, and I think the Rams, incredibly, Sean McVay has kind of gone back to basics on his approach. When you look at the Rams team that went to that first Super Bowl, ultimately the Patriots shut them down, but that season, Connor, it was all about the run game. The run game was what got everything going. And Sean McVay has gone back to that, and they are using all sorts of kind of different concepts to get into really good running situations. I think they will have seen what the Broncos have done. We know that this is a Magpie League. That's the reality. Sean McVay is a very smart coach, and I think that is what they will look to do. It won't be easy. They're not going to score 37 points this week, but I think they probably have enough, because I just don't think the Browns will be able to score enough. I just don't think Flacco, or if it is Dorian, I don't think either of them will be able to score enough.
Brian, the Sunday night Island game is Chiefs at Packers. This another intriguing one. The Chiefs, coming off that loss against Philadelphia, played Las Vegas over the weekend, and for an alarming start to the game, I'm sure a lot of Chiefs fans were thinking, "Oh no, is this where the wheels come off?" It really was going the wrong way, and then they came roaring back, as we're used to seeing them do over recent season. But it doesn't quite look right, and this is not the greatest time to be rolling into Lambeau when the Packers are kind of feeling themselves and getting a few things right, and you're seeing that LaFleur ability to scheme people open. You're seeing the defense make plays. They were very aggressive in the opening period against Detroit, knocked Detroit off kilter, and won that Thanksgiving game, although they were underdogs. This is not a bad time from a Green Bay perspective to be welcoming the Chiefs, and it's not a great time from a Kansas City perspective with the way things have been going. This one could very much be up in the air.
Yeah, but I thought actually I'd go the other way on that game last week. I think don't poke the bear too much, and essentially I think that's what we saw last week. The Raiders going 14 points up on the Chiefs, and for me, that was very much a get-right game. You spoke on the show on Monday around the precision of some of Mahomes' passes, some of the passes which we haven't been seeing for quite a while, and in particular the connection with Kelsey. And Prosecco was playing like a man with his head on fire at times. He was both in terms of the run game and the receptions. And Rashid Rice has come to his own. I think we're expected. We could keep talking this second half trend, and it hasn't really materialized. And then last week they got it together in the second half. And I think this could be the shot in the arm that as it gets the Chiefs back where we want to see. We're going into December now. This is when we say they tend to get things right and start playing their best football. And you asked me on Monday, which of the two teams do I see as a legitimate team to go to the playoffs? Is it the Rams or is it the Packers? And I think it's the Rams more so than the Packers. And I think the Chiefs will go into Lambeau on Sunday night and put a marker down because they recognise they got to keep on winning if they want to play football in Arrowhead come January. So no, I think this is a nice one for the Chiefs. I think they'll put points and I think they'll beat this Packers team and essentially end the Packers' ambition to be in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think that's about right. Ultimately, I think Packers are, as I said, they're not in a bad spot here. That's a morale boosting win, but it's a slightly funky divisional game with a lot of kind of curious plays and one-offs that I'm not necessarily sure are repeatable. And that, to your point, I'm not necessarily sure are repeatable against the Chiefs. Rashid Rice was really good last weekend. He's someone that the Chiefs have really needed to step up. We talked about how last season you always got somebody stepping forward, whether it was Sky Moore or Kadarius Toney, or someone was making plays. That hasn't really happened for the Chiefs this year, really, until, as you say, they went 14 points down to the Raiders, and you started to see some of the things that they wanted to work well, working well. Also, the run game has been a sneaky success over the past couple of weeks, and Andy Reid has been leaning on that more heavily, and it's been paying dividends. We talked about it at length on the podcast in the past few weeks about how Steve Spagnuolo's defense continues to be a real strength, and they've had to lean on it more heavily this season than they perhaps would have liked to. And that'll travel well, and I think it'll travel well to Lambeau, and I do think Kansas City will dig this one out. Colin?
I absolutely hear what you're both saying, and it could well prove that they Rice gets going and Mahomes, but it was a divisional game, and we've seen that before. Going to Lambeau against this Packers team who are really improving. And Jordan Love had his best game of the year against the Lions. And I think it will be interesting because he is a guy who he sat for too long, and he started the season off, and at times he looked lost. He looked like a deer in the headlights. It was all happening way too quick for him. But as the weeks have gone on, and particularly since that loss to the Vikings, I think at the end of October, he has looked much better over the past few weeks. It has slowed down for him. He's been able to find his receivers. He has the strength. He has the arm talent, and he really put it together last week. I think they're capable of it. I mean, yeah, like probably maybe 7-8 times out of 10 the Chiefs are the better team and they win it. But I'm going to say that the Packers can get the win here, especially because I think Lambeau is going to be so up for this, right? They're surging and they've had a tough season. The fans are going to really get behind this, given what happened in the Detroit game. It won't be comfortable for the Chiefs. I think the Packers can do it. And I think for the Chiefs, then I think that's bad news if you're the Buffalo Bills, because I think what will end up happening is the Chiefs will end up winning their last 5 games as a result. But I do think the Packers can spring the shock on Sunday Night Football.
All right. Sometimes good to see that we don't all agree, and a little bit of contention in the building. On Monday night, the Bengals are traveling to Jacksonville to take on the Jaguars. I'll kick off here. I think I really like what I've seen from the Jags in recent weeks. I think they're really playing complementary football, and particularly impressive by what they're doing defensively. The 2 linebackers, we talked about them the other night, Trayvon Walker and Josh Allen, have been electric for them. gotten Trevor Lawrence back fully fit now. Knee injury, as Doug Peterson was saying a couple of weeks ago, has been hampering him and hampering what they were able to do offensively. I think everything's humming really nicely there. He's got some really good connection going with Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk showing strongly. They're a weapon-rich offense, and when you complement that with the takeaways that they've been getting, and now increasingly the pressure they've been getting on QBs and the sacks and quarterback hits they've been racking up, I think they're a really, really tough out at the moment. And unfortunately, the Bengals, the Burrowless Bengals, although they played the Steelers tough last week and made them grit that one out, as you were saying, Brian, we like some of what we've seen from Jake Browning already, and you hope that this game isn't too much for him. But this is a very, very difficult one for a quarterback feeling his way into the game. It's a big spot. Jags chasing the division win there, and I'd be fairly confident that they're going to win this one comfortably enough in the end. How do you see it?
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think we touched on it there for the Dolphins. Like, there's a bigger storyline at play here for this Jags team because of the nature of where they are with their 8-3 record. That is, if they were to run the table, they could find themselves in the 1 seed. So there's a lot to play for with this team. Even though they've seemed to have put a bit of distance around the Texans in terms of winning the division, and they're playing at a level. And we saw last week, in particular, what's been really impressive over the course of the season is Ridley, and he's a real legitimate number 1 receiver for them. You've seen the bounce in which they've had having him there. At times last season, you could figure out this offense and slow them down, but that hasn't been the case in a lot of games this year. They've put up a lot of high numbers, and I think on Monday night, we saw last week, Jake Brennan was more impressive in the Ravens game, and we did touch on it last week that sometimes when a quarterback comes in, it's unscripted. The team doesn't know the defense doesn't know how to react. You get a bounce. But last week, there was a lot of fortunate plays in the game last week, which probably meant that the game wasn't as convincing for the Steelers as it was. So for me, I'm with you. I think it's a dominant performance. And I just also, one other thing I'd like to call out is that Kieran Boyle, who does our instant reaction podcast on Sunday, will be at the game in a media capacity for the Irish NFL show at this game on Monday night. So we'll have some additional content going out from the game itself. So that's good to see. And obviously, hopefully he gets some great opportunities to ask questions of the coach and ask questions of Trevor Lawrence. And hopefully it's after they've had a good, strong win.
Great stuff. Looking forward to that column. It's kind of very much a last stand for the Bengals before it officially becomes a lost season. And sometimes that can bring the very best out of a team. It's not like this team has been all about Joe Burrow. They've had to cope with him injured for the first few games of the season, even as it was. So they have different ways to win, but they'll need to bring everything to the table here if they're going to dig this one out, you would think.
They have different ways to win, Connor, but this is all about Joe Burrow. I mean, like he's that good and he's that important to them. And yeah, they have a good defense. It's why and you and I both picked them to go to the Super Bowl. But to go on the road to a team who are playing as well as they are. And it was interesting. Frankie Abbott, who has been on with us on a number of times and done shows with us, but he asked the question as a Broncos fan. He was saying, is there another example of a coach or as transformative an experience as going from Nathaniel Hackett to Sean Payton? And I would say, yeah, that is a big upgrade. But I would argue that Dougie Pederson from Urban Meyer might be even bigger, because as bad as Nathaniel Hackett was, and he was horrific, and he remains horrific as an offensive coordinator, he wasn't going around kicking players. He wasn't going around not flying back on the team plane to go out drinking with young co-eds. And the litany of shenanigans that Urban engaged in. So to go to that, I would argue is probably as big a jump. And I've been really impressed at what Doug has done in Jacksonville. I think what you're also seeing is Trevor Lawrence, who was clearly carrying an injury. And in a season where, whether somebody is injured or not, and how injured they are, has been a discussion point. I do think Trevor Lawrence was carrying an injury, and I think he looks a lot better, a lot freer, a lot more mobile over the past few weeks. I think that we talked about it. Certainly, I mentioned it on Monday. Playing a contract year has brought the very best out of Josh Allen. I hope he gets all of the money because the players deserve it. And I just think that the Jags will have a little too much for a Burless Bengals on Monday night.
All right, Colin, the Florida and Ohio State fans will be coming for you now over your traducing of Urban Meyer, who clearly wasn't given enough chance to succeed in the NFL, only got 13 games, and how unfortunate it was.
We have some great kind of content. Obviously, Brian, you mentioned earlier you have the podcast coming up. Have the podcast with Seth Walder from ESPN, and on the day that the Spotify dropped the Wrapped, thanks to everyone who does listen. We appreciate it, and if you enjoy the podcast, please do rate, review, and subscribe on whatever platform, whether it's Spotify, whether it's Apple Podcasts, or wherever else. It makes a real difference. It does help other people and new people to find us, and that is what we are all about.
Yeah, looking forward to unwrapping my own Wrapped column. All those Taylor Swift songs are clearly, that's my daughter listening to the Spotify, and I will sign an affidavit to that effect.
Lots to look forward to, and we are back obviously next week. What are we? Is next week? Are we going to be at the 75% mark after this weekend in terms of what's left?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah, we're getting to that stage of the season where you're definitely, imagine you're using the column now, which is the ESPN predictor machine every week, selecting every game, and the direct link to if the season was to end today, who'd be in the playoffs and who's not. But there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot more Saturday games to come as well. The NFL will be announcing their 3 games for the week prior to Christmas. There's also then a Saturday game, which is it's right up your street, Connor. 23rd of December, Saturday night, 9:30. The Steelers hosting the Bengals, of course. Yeah, the magical Steelers. But now, all joking aside, some great and it helps us because breaks up the games. There's more podcasts to discuss different games and different permutations and stuff. So, looking forward to December's action to come.
Season only starts, as the cliche goes, after Thanksgiving. Anyway, we're looking forward to it.